Everyone is guilty of slave trade. It's not Europeans alone. Hello, everybody. My name is Paul Tasler. I am a Liberian born but a U.S. citizen residing here in the city of Sacramento, California, where I'm bringing you this story. Today is June the 21st, 2026, and the time is 10:43 a.m. on my clock. I'm here to talk about the transatlantic slave trade. And I don't know why Africans cannot focus on present day issues and they are talking about way by slave issue that we are all guilty of. I keep wondering, and I said to myself, why can't Africans leave slave trade talks to the past where everyone enslaved their brothers and sisters and they start to focus on the present day issues where we need to, talk about things that we need to do to bring about development in our country, in our countries, individual countries, and on the continent. Why we can't talk about that? Putting together good African policies and building institutions that will make us to do business fairly on fair terms with international, companies. While we can talk about those kind of things to remove the unfair treatment of trade. While we can talk about those things, I want to say certain things, but this is a Facebook ad and I don't want them to reject it because I'm talking things that are more political and all of that. So I'm trying to be very tactful, careful about what I want to say. But if freedom was very free, the things were not censored, I was going to say exactly what I need to say so you can understand clearly what I'm talking about. You see, the story of slave trade is distorted. It is not told in fair terms. It doesn't contain all of what is needed for people to get a clear picture of what the slave trade or slavery in general looks like. Some countries are advocating for reparations from Europeans for transatlantic slave trade. And I don't see why people should be talking about that. Recently, this year, 2026, one particular country, anonymous, I cannot call it name because of Facebook policy, that this country created a documentary to showcase the transatlantic slave trade. Thus, I found the documentary distorted. I find it unfair. I find it imbalanced. I find it incomplete with the information needed because it didn't showcase how African chiefs participated in the capturing and selling of their fellow Africans. Worse still is that the documentary failed to showcase who, whether black people or white people, captured the people who were molding their clay pots and going about other activities in the fields as portrayed in the documentary. So the video I watched, the documentary, showed some Africans, women and children in the field of work where they were molding their clay pots, those water vessels, our people, even pots, they were the utensils those days. They used to cook and everything. So they were making them in the field and suddenly something happened and the video showed that they just started running, and as they were running, poof, they jumped to another point where they were in a ship. So the video did not show who were the people that broke into that field to capture them. Were they black people? Because usually Africans were used to be sent, they were recruited as soldiers or agents for the Europeans, and they were sent into the field. And the point here is, I want you to capture, is that they were paid to do a piece of work for the Europeans. So they were compensated. They were earning their living. It's just like I'm in America now. I'm paid every piece of work I do. And so whether it's small or not, it's still money that sustains me. So these people were paid. They took care of their family. And that's how they were doing their work diligently. They send them and they go and capture their fellow Africans and give them to the Europeans. And not only that, there were some Africans who themselves who became slave traders. They themselves had their own people to send out to go capture other Africans and then sell those. They were goods for them. The same way others were selling Marigara pepper, they were selling gold and different things, ivories to the Europeans. So there were others who were capturing their fellow Africans and giving them out to the Europeans for money or whatever was the form of payment. So the ones who broke into that field were the Africans, traders who broke into that field and captured their fellow Africans and gave them to Europeans before they landed in the European ship. Were they Africans themselves who were working for Europeans and broke into that field? Or were they white people, white Europeans themselves who broke into that field and captured the humans? All this was lacking in the documentary. And that's the destruction I'm talking about here. Everything should be taken together before we can come up to a decision to know whether it is right to call for payment, which is called reparation. But it's not only this. I will come to why reparation is not necessary. Further, let's go down. We must not forget that Africans captured people from wars among themselves and turned those captives into slaves in their various kingdoms. So when Europeans arrived and needed slaves to work for them, Africans sold their domestic slaves to the Europeans, engaged into more tribal wars to capture more people for sale, and some Africans aided or worked along with Europeans to find and capture more slaves for payment. This means that African chiefs and wealthy people receive compensation for giving their fellow Africans to the Europeans. I think I said this earlier, but just for emphasis. Before Europeans arrived on the land of Africa, in the continent of Africa, Africans themselves practiced slave trade. From their tribal wars, they turned their captives into slaves. And the maltreatment that the documentary was trying to showcase to justify payment of reparation, the maltreatment was also going on in Africa among themselves, even before Europeans arrived. The slaves were maltreated, beaten, and even women were raped. All of these things were going on in Africa. Please go and check your history in your country, every African country. Revisit your history. If you don't find traces of slavery in your home country, as an African who may be listening to me and may have a problem with what I'm talking here, go. So, European that you gave your fellow African, how they treat the African, their good. Those were their goods, how they treat their goods. How different it is from how you yourself, when you enslave your fellow Africans, you treated them. How different it is. Are you going to be paying some of the people whose people you capture and you enslave in your own land? Will you go to history to start paying those people if you are requesting for reparation today? And I think you were paid, like I said. The chiefs made money. Some wealthy African family today, their forefathers engaged into these kind of things. Just like some wealthy Europeans today, their forefathers engaged into those things. So This is human nature. This is thing that belongs to the past. This is something that happened in the past. This is how societies were those days. Why can't we focus on today? Today's problems that we have, how we should develop our countries. Is it the reparation money that will build and develop your countries? I don't know how many millions or billions they will give. The billions and millions they have been, African countries have been receiving in loans and whatever. What did they do with those things? They say this reparation that will give you all the wealth you need to build Africa, instead of focusing on what are things you need to put into place to be able to generate more income, more revenue to build your countries, more billions. Now, let me tell you what I received from my grandfather before he died in 2002. My grandfather, Ben Doja, told some fireside stories on some of his good days. He spoke of being a little boy who was mining birds on his parents' farm when the first eclipse occurred in West Africa. My Google search gave me 1898 for the eclipse. So it means he was born before 1898 and he died in 2002. You can do the calculation to see how old he was. He said his parents called the eclipse a fight between the sun and the moon because the sun was overhead when darkness swept across it, causing nighttime for the people to see the moon, but for a short while. He gave his own story. He was a boy mining birds, and so darkness fell, and they were all struggling to go home. But then later, the sun came out again. He said he fought in some tribal wars. So he told some stories about those they captured in wars, similar to what I already explained. So there's no need for me to go to it. Some of these people, especially women, were turned into wives, which we can call unconsented marriages took place in Africa itself, before Europeans arrived, I'm talking about. My grandfather himself later became a victim of the transatlantic slave trade when some in an African country engaged into human trafficking. In my home country, engaged into human trafficking. For Facebook ad policies, I am not able to disclose names of a particular group of people who sold their fellow Africans into slavery as documented in 1930. As he told his stories, he couldn't stop recounting every brutality of inhumane treatment he witnessed and encountered, starting from when they were chained on ships, beaten on plantations, and everywhere they took them to work, whether domestic household work or field work. Some people died in the process. He said some of his friends died on the plantation, in the ship, and all of that. According to him, he returned home when his master granted him freedom. However, I think his release may have come due to the 1930 action from the U.S. government when it took an allegation of forced labor and slave trading to the League of Nations, presenting evidence that a certain people in an African country were forcing indigenous citizens into labor and selling them to Spanish colony of Fernando. So you see, in every instance where slave trade took place in Africa by Africans, they receive compensation. So why should Europeans be held responsible today for what we are guilty of as well? What is that? Why is that? I will stop here today. I don't think people should be wasting their time. And I don't know, even if they get the money, how will it develop Africa? I don't know how many billions they are asking for. Is it trillion? Would they go back in their own continent to start paying some people